introduce you to Anne Boda. She will be talking about citizen science and the Living Lab model. Anne is a participatory health lead in the center. And here my text is covered, which is not good. Center for Digital Transformation of Health at the University of Melbourne, and a fellow of the Australasian Institute of Digital Health. Anne has overseen government-funded open innovation initiatives in the UK and Australia. Her interdisciplinary research interests intersect sustainability, citizen science, and participatory digital health practice. So we are looking forward to this experience, and let me get your slides up.
Thank you.
Oh. And let's make sure that the slides travel. If you say when you go to the second slide, and that if people can please give feedback that the second slide is initiated. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. It's rather a breadth topic, and I hope it will be useful in the context of looking at different ways of participation in a living lab. And this topic comes about because I was awarded an EU Horizon grant to look at advances in health and biomedical citizen science. And I traveled over to the UK and spoke with people in Europe. I think, is this all good for people seeing my slides or hearing me? No, I'll move on now.
Yes.
Thank you. So just before I carry on any further, I would like to make an acknowledgement of country and the traditional owners of land on which I'm speaking to you today, and all the traditional custodians of the lands on which you are also living, learning, and working from. And looking to share this talk more widely with you as we go along. Sorry. So the definition of citizen science has been around for very recently, for recent times actually. This one is the official definition from the Australian Citizen Science Association, which itself was only established in 2014. And the formalization of citizen science as a practice is actually around that time, and including the Citizen Science Association in the US and the European Citizen Science Association in Europe. And at a very basic level, it's about public participation and a collaboration in research and along research processes, with the aim to increase scientific knowledge, but other forms of knowledge as well. So when we think of citizen science, at least in the Australian context, I think we have to be mindful that citizen science has been practiced for a long time. And we can appreciate that those who have lived on this land for thousands of years have been practicing citizen science in some way or other. And we can look at this with the observations of the sky and the naming of the sky that we have local knowledge, using local knowledge, like this wonderful picture of Orion's belt and some of the stars being named after dingo puppies, for instance. So we get a flavor of the way in which local knowledge can translate into aspects of community science, which I'm coming to. And also in this topic, we're looking at human health and citizen science and the way Indigenous health is linked to land care, and how citizen science can bring this participation of land care and health as a holistic sort of approach. And I want to just give reference also to more Western notion of citizen science with Ferdinand von Mueller, who was director of the Royal Botanic Gardens here in Melbourne. And he actually enlisted a number of women, pioneering women across the country, to make helped contribute to flora and fauna observations. And we have Louise Atkinson, who herself was a famous botanical illustrator. So observing nature is a very large area of citizen science within Australia. And the Atlas of Living Australia, which is a large platform, and I do invite you to look at that, has a lot of biodiversity knowledge contributed by citizens. And there's also a very large community worldwide, and this is what this talk is really about, is how do we approach participation also from a breadth perspective and reaching people we may not be able to reach in more localized projects. So this is just a Wikipedia diagram suggesting how millions of people are actually involved in some form or other of engagement on citizen science platforms, including Zooniverse and the NASA Globe schools site, for instance. Traditionally, citizen science is around 3 types of participation and it really is also in a gradient of the participation of the public citizen in relation to the scientist. So contributory has a less sort of contribution to a project in the research process than co-creation, which is where we find ourselves in a lot of the discussion today in Living Labs. Citizen science is also around data. So one of the distinctive points around citizen science is them actually contributing to data collection, data generation, and analysis, for instance, as well as dissemination and discussing results. So how do we think about that in a Living Lab environment? eBird is an example of a citizen science project where a very good example of a lot of data being generated, including 2.5 to 3 million observations per month. And these are global projects. And the Zooniverse Galaxy Zoo, which was a very famous Zooniverse project. Zooniverse itself is a platform for other citizen science projects, not just Zooniverse, but environmental, humanities, and classifications done by the public have led to major research publications and new discovery. So where are we with health research? And this is where some of my discussion will be focused now. So when we're looking at the key determinants of health and social determinants, biomedical risk factors, behavioral risk factors, we have opportunities here for community involvement in looking at these bases of determinants of health. We've already seen how environmental health can impact well-being, how we can address climate change. And then we can also see all the onion of this diagram going down to the individual lifestyle factors. So participation in health research, and I'm actually coming from a digital health perspective, so the ICT aspects are actually quite important here for participation as well. And there has been an enormous rise in participation in health research, and largely because of diminishing barriers to entry, better digital health literacy, better access to ICT, but also ways in which we are thinking about ourselves in terms of our health and personal genomic and health data being available, and the emergence of open data sharing and crowdsourcing platforms, for instance. So at the end of the day, there's actually quite a few ways in which we can describe citizen science, and it's both an opportunity but also a challenge, because we can see actionable knowledge in the aspects of many, we or us, and also the individual. And we also see in the community science literature that there's actually quite a lot of terms that are shared with the co-design, with the different types of participation we may be looking at in an innovation scenario. There's quite a lot of also resources. So this Biomedical Citizen Science Hub, which is supported by the National Institutes of Health in the US, a very good point of reference for ongoing projects. And also looking at methods, for instance, is really good to go into some of these projects that are available online and seeing how the ways in which they are actually engaging. So for instance, there's a new Zooniverse project called Etchicel, where you can actually annotate an image, and there's reliant, of course, on a lot of data being available as well. But it allows the community to come in and help with the actual process of analysis. And then there's other types of participation where we may be supporting data contributions. For instance, this is COVID Near You, coming out of the Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard, but it's also been available here in Australia, where you can contribute to through data collection around you know, COVID, the COVID situation as a tracker. And then there are sensing projects like the Citizen Science Urban Microclimate Project, which actually had Australian government funding. And Inspire Australia, if you have a chance to look at that, is an annual fund that is coming through for collaborations, not in any way like the European money that's come into citizen science, but it's providing opportunities to look in ways in which we can bring communities in to do meaningful research. I've alluded to this about biocitizenship, and this is more about the individual and the us in terms of thinking about ways in which we engage with peers and patients associations, disease advocacy groups, self-help groups, DIY bio, and research participation itself. And it's often very much underpinned though by, as I was saying, about contemporary biotechnology, you know, DNA, direct to consumer genetic services, but also thinking about ourselves as a human being in relation to others as well as to the environment. Patients Like Me is a very good example of a platform where there's much more around personalized health and finding peers and thinking through narratives around shared experience. But if we look at the individual as well, and we're talking probably here around very connected individuals who are using wearable devices or other ways of monitoring their health, tracking their health. And we can see that as an individual or even as a peer group or a family group, for instance, in this experience. And as an individual, how do we also think about putting a problem out there and actually asking the community to help? So for instance, this is actually an artist called Salvatore Canesi, designer artist who had brain cancer. And at the time of his first diagnosis, it was looking pretty bleak. And he just shared his images of his cancer. And he is still around. But it was a lovely way of engaging the community, thinking about a shared experience and ways in which we can contribute to thinking about you know, something that we may be affected by through our own experiences or family or friends. There's also very much in citizen science covering also aspects of DIY bio or hacking. And in the type 1 diabetes community, there's actually quite a very mature community of hacking continuous glucose monitoring systems, devices, so that they're more tailored to individuals. And in this case, a parent has customized his child's CGM device to alert more readily in the him into the into his practice of you know, his dietary needs, and particularly for nighttime alerts. They're much more tailored. So citizen science and open innovation, I realize that I'm probably running a little bit over time, but I wanted to say that citizen science has been very much a movement that's becoming much more integrated with Living Labs, particularly in the European experience. And open science is one of those open movements that's very much also aligned in terms of thinking about citizen science and open science and the open innovation agenda. So this was a project that was around doing it together science, which was looking at the policy space and how citizen science fits within the idea of citizenship, sustainability, inclusion, and how we make this, how we feed into socially relevant sort of agendas. There's a group at University College London doing extreme citizen science, and this is a little bit of what we were thinking about also perhaps with co-design, but also shifting to citizens as researchers themselves, defining the problems and then taking the solutions themselves and going out as well with guidance from the research community. A lot of living labs have citizen science components to them, and this includes the health-oriented living labs, which I won't go through all of them, but the Living Lab for Health, Sonia's lab, for instance, this one called iScape, which is around pollution sensing, all are using a living lab, a citizen science model, and this one is particularly geared to citizen science, and it's a good guide. Different types of public participation also in the policy space. Citizen science is falling into different points in which you can come in to interact with an organization or the public. IAP2, which is a spectrum of public participation, is a very interesting guide as well, because participation may not always be on the very end of the empowerment side. It might be that our aims can be directed toward more consult and involvement aspects. So my Center for Digital Transformation of Health, it has just been launched in November of last year. We're looking at a digital health innovation pipeline, very much in line with what John spoke about, but also integrating co-design living lab. My colleague Vicky Palmer is leading on a co-design lab, which is an integrated mental health care. And we are coming together to look at an iterative cycle of innovation. And where citizen science fits around that in terms of a collective impact is where we're going to find spaces for looking at these different ways of involvement, from the co-design to the other aspects of collective involvement. And so partnerships with Sonia, with the co-design living lab, which is in general practice at the University of Melbourne. And we're very closely working with the Melbourne Academic Centres for Health, which include various hospitals and research institutes. So when we're looking at a future citizen-driven health scenario, we're looking at the citizen being any of us in many respects. That's sort of the democratization, which Phil mentioned earlier as well. And looking at both the virtual and physical spaces to accommodate communities and individuals. But there's a lot to do, and we need better definitions around what health and medical citizen science can do and what it is. And also that translation of data to knowledge, because data is a very big area, and we're not just talking about data coming from sensors, but also our knowledge, and how that comes into a transformation and what that means in terms of participation, and also the motivational interests which have come through in discussion today. But we also need to understand the participants' experiential process as well, and the natural limitations. As well as the technical feasibility, which comes in on the platforms and tools that will help us support activities that could be more integrated, particularly when we're looking at participatory scenarios. And of course, the very big question of ethics and governance, and what does it mean to be a good citizen? So relevance, diversity, fairness, trust. And again, it comes to, are we having all the right people in the room to make a good example, to make a good outcome, good design, etc. And then I'm also wearing another hat, looking at the campus as a living lab, and the SDGs is one sort of way of gelling across a number of projects that are ongoing on the campus. But actionable knowledge and policy are probably where we see a lot of these pathways coming through, with the quadruple helix of players around government, public, academic, industry, and the citizen. And we see citizen science as a sort of impact area, again, this collective impact, and how we can get citizens contributing to something bigger, or at least that awareness going into a cycle of adoption and implementation and better problem definition. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Is there a question for Anne? I think we have time for 2 questions. I think it's all right if it's okay with the group if we run a few minutes into the break. Also, I really don't wanna rush through the presentation, have no time for questions. So I decided that my talk will be with the online talks that we really have the time and the focus on for presentations. Any questions for Anne? I check the chat. There is no question there yet. I think, Ingo, you raised your hand?
Yes, I did. One quick question for Anne. So I heard that finding the right stakeholders is a key problem and getting them together in the right way. My question to you is, what methods do you use for identifying these stakeholders? Is there a particular really reliable method that works for you for different scenarios? Or is this sort of an ad hoc thing that you need to revise and adjust every single project?
Yes, that's a very good question. And in fact, we are looking at different ways of involving people. So for instance, the Co-Design Living Lab at the University of Melbourne has started a registry. And that is for those with different health conditions, largely around mental health. But that's one way where we're looking at those with an interest in participating in the co-design sessions. And then for larger groups, we're partnering with, let's say, the Consumers Health Forum of Australia, or the Third Age, University of the Third Age, and trying to get trusted partnerships with groups that have a large sort of base of potential participants, where we can enable them to give voice to being part of the research process. And it will also be very much aligned to whether we do something on an online platform or it's something we do as in a co-design situation. So again, it's really mapping out those types of participation with the delivery, with the engagement side where we identify, people. Does that make does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. That was very comprehensive.
Thanks, Ingo. I have, I think, a question from Gareth.
Yeah, sure. So in the earlier session, you talked about the idea of disinformation and that sort of thing. So do you think citizen science is protected from that in some way by the way it's constructed, or is it something that we might see more people deliberately trying to disrupt?
Yes, I mean, this is very good, this disinformation question, and it's a very tricky one because, again, we're really relying on trusted partnerships to sort of help with managing disinformation, and particularly if you're having open platforms where you're looking at people's contribution and experiences, and ways in which we can sort of moderate that. We haven't gone to that stage yet of having to do that in any particular project. But it is, and we had this discussion actually earlier about having a framework for openness and sharing and transparency, and what that means in the context of, you know, misinformation coming through those channels. So, and it's whether we have some sort of charter or principle. So for instance, I should mention that the European Citizen Science Association and all the associations have 10 principles for engaging in community, in citizen science, which we'll make available to you. But they're guiding principles, which is about, you know, this trust and reciprocity and the value that we put on the citizens who are involved, and the opportunity there to provide a safe environment for them as well. And safe, by safe we mean, can we moderate where needed areas where there might be misinformation. But partnerships are very key to that, you know, to help that. So it's a type of digital citizenship which we need to foster now, particularly where we are seeing things happen around climate change, other areas that are getting a bit ripe with disinformation coming through, and working with the right agencies and partners for the right problems we're trying to solve.